how do we now create something that tastes delicious? Because especially when you're thinking about children or a category like cereal, you don't want it to feel like a diet product. You want it to feel like your breakfast cereal that you ate, watching cartoons on Sunday. And so that was the goal we set out to do. And that took 2 years of actual product development and a lot of time and effort to get there. But once we identified there was a problem, we had to create the solution.
Hi, and welcome to Female Founder World. I hope that you have been enjoying the show so far. We've had so many great interviews. I'm your host, Jasmine. Today's conversation is with Margaret Wishingrad. She's the founder of a Better For You cereal brand called 3 Wishes. And a funny story that I actually didn't realize until after the podcast. We were actually seated next to each other, Margaret and I, about 2 years ago, I think just before the company launched, at a dinner, and we got talking, and I had completely forgotten that we'd made this connection, and so had Margaret, to be honest, until afterwards, which is just a funny way that the world works sometimes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the chat, and let's get into it. So Margaret, welcome to the show. I love to kick off by just asking the founders that we have on to tell us about their company in their own words and a couple of milestones or insights that you can share to let people know where you are in the founder story and where the company is in its kind of which growth phase you're in.
Sure. So 3 Wishes is a better for you breakfast cereal that tastes like the cereal you know and love as a kid, with just much cleaner ingredients, great macros. It's high in protein, low in sugar, and it's gluten and grain free. And we are now nationwide within Wholefoo, Sprouts. So we're in about 2,000 stores and really are in a hyper growth startup phase. And so it's an exciting time.
Amazing. And what was your background? Like, how did you come to entrepreneurship?
So my husband and I have an advertising agency here in New York as well called BigEyedWish. And so we've worked with the Fortune 10s of the world. We worked with small clients that would come to us with an idea and have us just blow it up and create the brand and get it into stores with them. And it's always been a really rewarding journey to come from the service side where we understood how to create a brand. And then now we skip to the other side, which is how do you now create a brand around a product and get that out into market?
Interesting. A lot of people that I speak to seem to come to launching like a DTC brand or a CPG brand more generally. They come to it from an agency background. I feel like a lot of people get their start in agency, kind of taking their skills and creating company that way, and then growing from there into building like a product-based business, which is really interesting. What are some of those skills that you thought were transferable when you launched 3 Wishes?
Yeah, I mean, it's super fascinating because they're different, but I think it's all about how you position it. So for us, when I think about it, I think about, oh, my client becomes now, instead of the CMO at whatever company, the client now becomes the buyer. And so I have to service the buyer. I have to make sure they're happy, that they're happy with how our shelves are set in store. And then you think about, the other analogy we always have is we always want to create an agency world. You have projects with clients and you have retainers where they become a monthly client. And so when I think about my consumers, we're out there to get retainers. We want someone to try us, to fall in love with it. So it starts as a project and then it becomes a monthly retainer to get that repeat. So I think for us, it's always just been about, we know how to communicate to people, whether it's we're dealing with a client and helping them communicate to an end user, or whether now it's our own product and we have to figure out who our new client is, quote unquote, and how to cater to them. So I think it's just drawing those parallels. But the most helpful thing is we've been able to learn from our clients, became our mentors. We watched their business grow from obviously the marketing and advertising side, which we were behind, but on the other side is we watched them operate and we understood the power of restraint on, being strategic with what stores you go into and how to really build a brand from the ground up has been really, really helpful for us as well.
Okay, so let's step back a little bit. And how did the idea for 3 Wishes come about? And what made you think, it was more than just an idea, it was something that could be a successful business?
Yeah, so the thing for us was we always had that inside little glimmer of I want my own brand because we do this for other people. And I think you always see something and you're like, how did I not think of razors or mattresses or pasta or 1,000 other things? And then for me, it was personally when my first son, who's now 4, and a half. But when he was 6 months old, one of the things you work on as a 6 month old is starting to eat your own finger food. And the recommendation for pincer skills was cereal. And I'm like, oh my God, I haven't had a bowl of cereal in the longest time. Is there anything out there for me? Is there anything I want to feed my kid? And I started to really take a deeper look at the category and walk the aisles of Whole Foods and all these other stores. And I'm like, wow, it's still a lot of the cereals I knew as a kid. Super colorful, super sugary, no nutrition, not how you should start breakfast. And then you look at the healthier stores and you're like, okay, it's a little less sugar. It's fortified with X, Y, and Z, but there's no real innovation because they never changed what it was made of. And I really saw that as a massive opportunity. Cereal is one of the largest aisles in a grocery store with the most amount of SKUs, the most colors, so much marketing. And it's really dominated by 3 to 4 large players. And that seemed like a huge challenge, but also very exciting in that it was ripe for disruption. And so once I did that analysis of, okay, is this a real problem? Is it just me or is it the rest of America, parents in New York? Who else is facing this problem? So I identified it. I identified the demographic, what they were looking for, right? So understanding what the amount of sugar and what that number needed to be. And then likewise on the protein side, what people felt was enough protein for a meal like breakfast. And we kind of worked it backwards where I understood, okay, I want to be at least 8 grams of protein. And at most, I want to be somewhere around that 3 grams of sugar. And so now how do we create a product that captures the macros, a cleaner ingredient profile with ingredients we know how to pronounce, we know what they look like as a whole object. And how do we now create something that tastes delicious? Because especially when you're thinking about children or a category like cereal, you don't want it to feel like a diet product. You want it to feel like your breakfast cereal that you ate, watching cartoons on Sunday. And so that was the goal we set out to do. And that took 2 years of actual product development and a lot of time and effort to get there. But once we identified there was a problem, we had to create the solution.
So I'm always interested when founders come from this. For example, you have the brand and the marketing experience, but you're not a chef, and you probably haven't produced a product before. What were some of those steps that you took to find someone who could come up with a recipe, to find a supply or a kitchen where you could create this to begin with? How did you go about solving that early problem?
Yeah, that's usually the biggest first step for people is to figure out how do you physically do this. And it's very difficult. And no one's really done a grain-free chickpea pea protein tapioca product that tastes like ours, made of what we've made ours out of. And so for us, it was, I always joke, I wish I could just throw on a KitchenAid attachment, screw it on and do this in my own kitchen because I would have probably gone to market a lot sooner and it would have probably been a lot cheaper. But it's super technical equipment, takes highly technical people that understand how to work with these types of products. So you hire a food scientist and then you just start to go through rounds of iteration and start to limit and play with variables, whether it's ingredients or any of the settings on any of this crazy machinery. And so we are really lucky that we are in the world of a ton of other CPG brands. And we got to talk to a ton of mentors and say hey, this, we're trying to do this. Do you know anybody that can work on something like this? And then so they would just redirect you. It was phone call to phone call to phone call. And eventually we got to the right person. And then it was really, and this is the other tough part, there's no yellow book or yellow pages, whatever we used to call it, of finding a manufacturer. You need to start just digging through the internet and just finding places that can potentially make it. And you make literally 1,000 calls, 1,001 rejections. And it's also something that is so capital intensive that a lot of people also doubt you when you call them. They're like, oh, cute, a mom with a hobby versus a woman with a real business. So it takes a lot of relationship building as well. So it's a really interesting and complex process.
You mentioned that it's a really capital intensive project. How are you funding this early on? And do you have any learnings that you could share for others who might be doing this for the first time now?
Yeah, so we bootstrapped initially on all the product development side. It was really whatever profits and proceeds we were making from the agency, we were reinvesting in the cereal because this was for us our big bet of hey, we really think this is a big thing. And if we can crack the code on creating the right product for the right market fit, I think we're in a really good place. And so we bootstrapped. And then once we got to a place of a really great minimum viable product and proof of concept, we then started to raise from friends and family and raised a small round. And then that kind of helped take us off the ground. And so my advice is if you can self-fund it, great. If you need to seek out a partner or a capital partner, then that's what you have to do. Innovation's hard and expensive.
Mm. This seems to be like, again, another common thread that I'm hearing from founders is like, get as far as you can on your own, get as much traction as you can. And then when you have to, or when you have kind of figured it out and you're just like pouring fuel on the fire, then, one of those 2 points is like a good time to start looking for external capital. Okay, so you've got a product. How did you actually like go to market? What was your launch strategy?
Yeah, so there's a retailer here locally in Westchester. So before we're like, okay, we know it's delicious. Our friends and family that we've seeded the product to know it's delicious, but let's not get ahead of our skis. Let's actually let consumers touch it, feel it. Fortunately, this was before COVID. It was a couple months before. So it was October 2019. And so there's a local store here and we spoke to them and we're like, hey, we have this product we're launching. They're like, great. Do you want to sample it on the weekends? And so on the weekends, my husband and I would go to the store called Stu Leonard's here in Westchester and we would start to sample it. And within a couple hours, we would sell 300 boxes. And we're like, okay, people are really loving it. They're excited to come back to this category. And they're like, I think we got it. Let's do it. And so that was kind of the initial, like, one part of the launch, but simultaneously, we also, behind the scenes, while we were going through all of the pilot phases of the product, we started reaching out to all of the buyers of the larger retailers that we plan to be with, like a Wegmans, a Whole Foods, a Sprouts. And so we let them come along for the ride in a way where it was like, hey, try this. What do you think of this flavor? What do you think you would change for your consumers that, shop in your store because you know them best? And so it was really just a partnership in that way that we structured it, and it made someone feel really invested. And so once we launched in October, within 2 weeks, we had authorization from Wegmans. A couple weeks later, we had authorization from Sprouts and then Whole Foods. And so it was really fast as people started to see the consumer reaction. So I think for us, it was truly right place, right time, right product.
I want to dig a little more into those retail partners. I think that those names that you're listing off are a dream for a lot of people who want to launch, especially like a grocery product. What kind of questions I'm assuming it's a buyer that you're speaking with, or a category manager or something like that. What kind of questions are they asking, and what did they want to see from you when you were bringing them along in your like product development journey?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So many things. So the first thing is they really wanted to see, one, that you're creating real innovation for a real need and something their consumers are looking for, whether it's from ingredients, from macros, from any of those things. But something we did ahead of time is while we were doing product development, it wasn't like, okay, now we have product, now we could think about launch. It was 2 years of strategy as well. So we really mapped out, okay, this is how, just by learning of how to build brands for other people, we knew that you have to really resonate within your own key demo and consumer community before you're starting to pour everything all over the place. And so it was identifying who that was. And so we were really dead set on crushing it in natural channel. And that's those Whole Foods, those Wegmans, and the Sprouts of the world. And so once we identified that, we said, okay, here's our target. Now let's identify who these buyers are, these category managers. And so we start to talk to them. And it's really the same way I talk about my product to anybody else is the same way I talk about it to a buyer. I share my story. I share why I'm doing this, what makes my product so unique. Something that's important to them as well, just one, obviously the product, how it tastes. Price is huge because they obviously know what resonates and doesn't resonate with the consumer. But the other thing that's really important is having the right supply chain, because they're like, okay, great, Margaret, I'm going to approve your product. Can you supply, 550 stores and make sure it stays in stock on shelves? And do you have the right foundation for that set up? And so part of the process as we were doing all of these pilots was making sure that it was Goldilocks in a way where it wasn't too small or too big. It was the perfect middle where I knew that they could supply what we needed. And that's also from an ingredient standpoint. I had to make sure all of my vendors, and we're also certified under a bunch of different certifications, but had to make sure my vendors could support quantities and timelines, and that we had the capital to support it too, right? Because retail is super expensive. And so they want to know, hey, can you support 4 quarterly promotions? And can you do these marketing programs? And so it's a lot of moving pieces, and that's what makes retail difficult. And then part of the buyer relationship also is convincing retail space isn't infinite. unlike online, you could just put something online and sell it. And if you don't sell it, you don't sell it. But they have to kick someone off to put your product on shelf. So it's really fighting for your own product, why you think it's going to win. And I think the other thing to remember with buyers is they're also reporting to someone in a way where they have to create a win for their category. Like, oh, I brought in a new cereal and it created XYZ more percentage in revenue than it did when, another brand had that shelf space. And so it's the game of relationships, the game of making sure that you know how to sell what you've created.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about e-commerce. I know that, you've been around, I think, for 2 years now, or a little bit over 2 years, and the focus has very much been on those retail partners. But how are you thinking about e-commerce? And is that something that has been a focus? Are you trying to acquire customers through digital channels, or has it really been about this relationship building with the retailers so far?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, if you asked me this question when I launched, would have been a very different answer than my answer today. And so we launched dead smack into a pandemic. And I think what we saw really quickly was consumer shifts in behavior. And so and I'm even seeing this, with my in-laws and my parents, everyone was, you needed to go to the store, you need to touch your own strawberries and you need to pick them out and bring them home. And what we're seeing is the consumers are so much more comfortable with online shopping, and that the behavior that used to be a little weird was like, oh, I go online to buy my groceries, like that's weird, has become so norm. And so yes, it was really important for us to become an omni-channel brand really quickly. We relaunched our website within 6 weeks of the pandemic starting to when we launched it. So we had a new website up and running sometime in April of 2020, which was great. And it was really optimized for an easy shopping experience for the consumer. The other thing to remember is that all these retailers created an online channel as well in their own ways, where you could buy something in store. It made discovery a little bit more difficult because I think grocery, you walk the aisles, you see things on the store shelf, you pick it up, you look at it. That was kind of stripped away. Everyone was running in with like a full gown and mask, grabbing the bread and the eggs and running out. And so it was the way you had to educate your consumer was super different. So we started to seed our product organically, no paid. We started to send it out to different influencers that we felt like were an authority on the space. And that would educate the consumer. So whether they bought it through our website, through Amazon, through Thrive, through Hungry Root, through Fresh Direct, or through an Instacart or Amazon Prime Now. And so however they were purchasing it was fine. It was our job to educate them. So it did shift to be online via e-tailers, but it wasn't super focused on, I need everyone to come to my website. I need all your emails now. It was something I think we slowly started to shift to. And so it's a healthy balance of all of those things. I think to be a brand and to become a household name, it's not just like, okay, I'm going to win just online. It's important to have a good hold in all these different channels.
So what does that actually look like when you talk about, okay, we needed to educate the consumers in a different way? Like really practically, what kind of things are you doing? Is that through social? Is that through getting featured in an email from your whole retail partners? Like what are those channels and activities?
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle for a healthy product usually is getting someone to believe that it's going to taste naughtier than it looks, because you're like, oh, healthy cereal is going to taste healthy. That's not the perception we want to have. And that's, I think, when we look at our brand, the way we designed it is we wanted it to look fun and have energy and not necessarily be like crunchy granola boring. It's going to taste like the box it's in. And so it took a ton of different things. So on social, why we would seed it organically and not do a paid approach was we know so many people now see and understand that influencers get paid to promote what they're talking about. And so for me, it was really important that someone would try it, share their experience, and that it was truly genuine. I didn't need, like 3 more story slides of why you should buy it. I just needed someone to go, oh my God, I tried this and it's delicious. And feeling that constantly and kind of surrounding somebody. For example, I would know, okay, like Jasmine follows these 10 people and there are another 100,000 Jasmines that follow the same 10 people. And that's that little core community and little tribe that I want to break into. And so I would find who those people were and kind of send it to that one little beehive. and try to just make the consumer feel surrounded. So then when they're in Whole Foods or wherever that consumer shops, assuming, let's say it was Whole Foods, they would see it in the store, they'd go, oh, I saw that brand. It feels and seems familiar. And so it was identifying who those people were. And that really allowed people to have the trust to consume the brand. So that's one educational point. So it was all different parts of social. PR has been a great part of it as well. It's general storytelling, right? So whether it's an article that features me and my journey, or whether it's an article and a roundup of, well and good doing the top 10 cereals they tasted this year. All of those little things help just gain that consumer trust. So I think it's just figuring it out. Social, it's PR, it's, whether you're in the email or the roundup from the retailer, and whether we've done digital and paid ads as well, because I think it's that constant feeling like the brand is real. If you're not in store, you're picking it up, it's tangible. Online, you need to feel like you're surrounded to make it feel real.
How has your day changed? How have things shifted since you're working in the agency to running this product-based business? What does a day look like for you now, and how's that shifted?
Yeah, it's definitely a big shift, because I think now I think about it, I'm like, oh, I have, this much inventory. It's like physical goods. It's such a different feeling, but I think who I am and my function has always remained the same. Where agency side, was I involved in creative all the time? Absolutely. But I really was operating the agency and looking at it from a business perspective versus a creative perspective. My husband is originally he's like a trained copywriter, right? So he thinks creatively and he always thinks marketing. And I always thought operationally. And so one, that makes for a really great working relationship. But additionally, my function was just the same. It's just now at a completely different scale, and a completely different situation, where before it was, how do you service a client? Now it's service a consumer, service a buyer, make sure it's in this warehouse, make sure this truck's not on fire. So it's a ton of those moving pieces, but I think it's an environment I thrive in and really love. And it's also super different because before it was in an office and now it's in my dining room. So very different environment too.
The last question that I ask everyone is for a resource that you can share. So maybe it's a book, a podcast, someone you follow that has kind of helped you along to grow your business, to become a better leader, to understand a very specific part of marketing, something that you can recommend others engage with.
Yeah, I really love, a few things. So I love on social, I love following Sarah Blakely, and I love her story and who she is. She's so real. She's like, here I am. I'm a mom. Yes, I forgot to pack my kids' school lunch today. And that is a really nice feeling to know that I'm not alone in the times I forget to pack my kids' school lunch. And so she's a wonderful leader. She's done an incredible job bootstrapping a brand and innovating. So I really, really look up to her. There's also Chelsea Hirschhorn that built Frida Mom and Frida Baby. She's done an incredible job. Love and adore her. And I think something that's important to me, and that's been a great tool of my own understanding of my consumer, is usually people will hand off the social part of the brand and just be like, hey, or someone post content and run it. Something I do regularly every single day is I go into the DMs and I read through most of them, because I want to know what consumers are saying. I want to know how they feel about it, how they're consuming it, where they're consuming it, what flavors they're consuming, how they're mixing them, how they're playing with them. And it's super important for me to understand that, to continue to innovate, so I know what they're looking for next, and just to understand the sentiment and how do I continue talking to this demographic that I've identified. And so that's been really important. As much as it's great to just hand off different parts of your business, it's important to be a master in each and every single part, and know that, if someone that was doing some function quit tomorrow, that you'd be able to just pick it up and do it. That's been game changing. So being nimble and staying on top of all these little parts of your business, super important.
Great advice. Well, Margaret, thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your story. Those are some incredible insights and some awesome advice as well.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Hey everyone, it's Jasmine again. Hope you enjoyed that one. If you did, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. It helps people find the show, helps us get great guests, and I'll see you at the next episode.